Uh, Thank you so much. We'll welcome HGSE alumni and current students to our Author Lightning Talks. This event is part of our Library Lovers Month programming. Really delighted to have all of you joining us today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lisa Himmelman. I am the Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement. And before we get started, I do have some light housekeeping items I'd like to review. So as you can see, we're hosting today's session in a meeting style, so feel free to keep your camera on or turn it off, whichever is your preference. We are recording today's session and we'll distribute it to everyone who registered after the fact. You'll notice that you're currently muted, and we do ask that you remain muted when you're not speaking. But this is meant to be an interactive session, so everyone here will have an opportunity to raise hands and go off mute to ask questions and have discussion later in the session. We also invite you to use the chat for this purpose as well, and we will be moderating that. We have closed captioning available for today's session. If you'd like to see the captions, please click on the CC/live transcript button, then click on show subtitle. You can turn off subtitles by clicking on live transcript, then click hide subtitle. And finally, we would love to get a sense of who's here today. So in the chat, please put your HGSE degree, your program or concentration, your graduation year, and where you're joining us from. And now I am delighted to introduce our HGSE alumni authors who will be sharing their books, experiences, and insights with us today. First, there is Dr. Elizabeth Santiago, EDM class of 2001, author of The Moonlit Vine. We have Ellie Burke, EDM class of 2015, author of Listen, Wonder, Ask. Tyler Sassaman, EDM class of 2006, who's the author of Just One Question, a road trip memoir. And Marina Lee, EDM class of 2007, who's the author of Culturally Responsive Conversations, Connecting with Your Diverse School Community. So Dr. Santiago, Liz, I'm going to get started with you.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and hello, everyone. It's good to see some familiar faces. I'm really happy to be here. So let me get started. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so I'm here to talk about The Moonlit Vine. It is a young adult novel that I released, or that was released last year in May. And to get us started with it, I'd like to share the trailer for the book, which I love. And so indulge me in this. It's short, and I think that you'll enjoy it, and it'll give a great overview of the book before I start talking about it. I know the music's so dramatic, but it's such a beautiful trailer. I thought I'd share it to get us started. Whoops, I don't want to share it again. So here is, I give you a little bit of a backstory as to why this story, what's the inspiration for the story, and a little bit about the Taino and why they're important. So as a Puerto Rican woman, I had always been told and always believed that I was Taino. My mother often said, and many people, in particular of Puerto Rican descent, often said we're made up of Native, African, and Spanish ancestry. So growing up, I knew a lot about the Spanish and a little less about my African ancestors, but almost nothing, or little to nothing about my Native ancestors, or rather my Taino ancestors. But what is documented comes from stories shared by the Spanish and other colonizers, stories that constitute the dominant narrative that we know today, which for a long time it was that the Tainos did not exist, did not survive, that they are extinct. So I had always been curious about this part of my heritage, and I did what I could to learn about them. I learned that their name was not really Taino, but they are of the Arawak Nation. Taino was the word they used when they greeted Christopher Columbus. They said Taino, which means we are good people. It was said to make Columbus and his people feel welcome. We are good people. You are welcome here. But that name stuck, and they were called the Taino after that. I learned that they were living on many islands in the Caribbean, Puerto Rico being one, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Cuba, and Jamaica. I think it's important to note that they are not the only native tribe, of course, in the Caribbean. There are many others, and we often hear about the Arawak, the Carib, or the Taino, but there are 100 other native groups in the Caribbean. I just wanted to acknowledge that. So in 2018, I read an article published on the Smithsonian called Ancient DNA Contradicts Historical Narrative of Extinct Caribbean Taino Population. Just if you are interested, I'm putting the link to that article in the chat. That article talked about a research project into the DNA of an ancient tooth found in a 1,000-year-old skeleton, and the skeleton was found in the Bahamas, and it was a human who predated Columbus. And so through the DNA they found in this tooth, researchers were able to track the migration of Arawak people from islands in the Caribbean and discovered that present-day Puerto Ricans had the most Taino DNA. So there it was, what my mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, as well as many other Caribeños had already been sharing with the world was that we were still here. And now science backed this up. And so something reawakened inside of me, a need to honor my ancestors and tell a story about the past and how it connects to the current time, to the present day. And I wanted to honor them in some way and to add to the narrative that, yes, we're still here. Yes, this is a story of survival. This is not a story of extinction. But how did my ancestors survive? And that was the story I wanted to tell couched in a present day narrative. So I also wondered how historical trauma affects our present day lives. Again, how the past is connected to the present, but I hadn't seen a book, fiction, nonfiction, that explored this in relation to the Taino. So, the late, great Toni Morrison said, if there's a book you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, you have to write it. And I took those words to heart, and that's what set me on the journey to write this particular story. And so the picture you see here is of Taino petroglyphs in Utuado, Puerto Rico. So I got to visit them while I was editing the book, and some of these images appear in the book if you get to read it. Let's see. So what is the book about? What the book is really about is, again, Puerto Rican history. It's history told through the ancestral line of Ana Kaona. Ana Kaona is a real historical figure who was a Taino leader in what is now Haiti. And it was wonderful to bring her to life in a slightly different way. So the opening of the book starts with her, and we go from there. It goes back and forth from 1492 to present day, and other time periods that show or share the history of Puerto Rico. We talk about, the book is about over-policing in schools. I was in a doctoral program when I wrote this. I know that's a lot. It was a lot, but I wrote this as a qualifying paper, actually, because I was struggling with trying to portray history or context of why there was over-policing in schools without really looking at the historical context. And so this was a necessary exercise for me that ended up being part of my doctoral work. So it really does explore how historical and generational trauma manifests itself in current times. And it also talks about a young girl's struggle to find her personal power in this world, and knowing that her community is there to help her, and that communities like hers have everything they need to support their own healing and understanding of their historical context. And so it's told, like I said, through present day. So it's not really, it's about all of these abstract things, certainly, but also very specific story about a young girl. And so this is a picture of a Taino leader, Mabo Damaka, and this image is carved. If you are ever in Isabela, Puerto Rico, and you could run right into this with sort of like what I did. And I quickly ran out of the car and took lots of pictures. So that is from that. So for those of you who teach, Lee and Low, who is the publisher of this book on their imprint 2 books, and Lee and Low is one of the largest multicultural children's book publishers in the country. They put together this free teacher's guide. It's absolutely wonderful. I was just so blown away by all the work that went into this. So if you are a teacher and you are looking for resources or would like to include this in your reading list, you're more than welcome to go to this link and download the teacher's guide. I'm going to put that link in the chat as well as this link, which is a link to a Spotify playlist. Love music. Music is an important part of the book. It starts with a song called Anacaona by the wonderful Cheo Feliciano. And you can also enjoy this as well. So I put those links in the chat for you. I think I'm got about a couple minutes left in my talk, so I will pause here and see if there are any questions. One thing I didn't say is that the book is actually has been published in both English and Spanish. And so that's really exciting too, because more people can access it and experience it. So I'm going to pause here and see if there are any questions. If not, I think that is my time. Oh, what was the most difficult part? What was your process? I did a lot of research. I have been thinking a lot about the Taino or researching a lot for many years. So I have every book you could possibly think of. But like I said, there weren't a lot of books that humanized them. I wanted to understand what it might have been like to live in that time when you were feeling this level of oppression. And I wanted to not just talk about that, but also talk about the culture, the joy, the intelligence that they had. And so I took a lot of creative license to create that world. And that also is one of the more difficult parts of writing the book, was that there wasn't a lot documented that wasn't authentic to them and their experience. I had to look at other people's perceptions, and of course they have their agendas if they're we're looking to paint the Taino a certain way. So I really had to dig deep and find resources that helped me to tell the story.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Liz.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was wonderful to be here.
Absolutely. And we'll have time for even more questions at the end of the session. So please continue to put those into the chat. And so now I am delighted to introduce Ellie Burke. Ellie, go for it.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Liz. I'm ordering your book as we speak. So very excited for that. So let me just share my screen and we can get going. So I am excited to introduce you guys to my children's picture book, Listen, Wonder, Ask. It's going to be in stores, in print in September. And this is my first time writing a children's book. And I'm so happy to have done it because I just have loved, I've always loved picture books. And I'm excited to tell you guys a little bit about my process. One thing that I think I always thought about was, how do you make a book? How does this happen? And so I think by telling you a little bit more about my book, maybe I can make that journey a little smoother for the next author out there. So I will tell you about my book, but I'm going to start with some of my inspirations. So my earliest inspiration was the author Barbara Cooney, who you might know from Hattie and the Wild Waves, or Island Boy, or Roxaboxen. When I was 5 years old, my mom took me to Damascotta, Maine to meet her and have her sign my book. So that's a photograph of us there in 1992. Another influence for me was my first job out of college was working at the Lower East Side Tenement Museum. And when I was at the Tenement Museum, I was an educator and a storyteller, and I performed in costume, and I performed these different characters who had immigration stories from all over the world, um, and had lived in that specific tenement building in the Lower East Side of New York City. So if you have ever been there, you know it's very interactive. And while I was at the museum, I started to lead programming for English learners. And I just became very, very passionate about being someone who could educate and welcome newcomers. And that really became um, my mission for my next, step in my career, which was to become an ESL teacher. I worked at Mattahunt Elementary School in Boston Public Schools in Mattapan, which is a bilingual Haitian Creole elementary school. And I think while I was there, I started to get um, these kind of seeds of ideas of being inspired by my students, inspired by people I met at HGSE, inspired by people that lived in and around the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And I started to imagine a fictional world where all of these people lived in the same city. And that kind of became the basis for my story. So my process for writing was to first kind of talk about what I wanted to write and make voice memos. And I've always written a lot of poetry. So my story started as um, a book in rhyming verse. And it was tell me where you come from, tell me why you came. And it was kind of this repetitive, verse based poem where different people in a neighborhood asked each other, uh, you know, where do you come from? What language do you speak? And where does that language come from? And I wrote it out as a poem. And then I just thought, I don't have the expertise to create a book, but I need to pull in some resources. So I started to go to Grub Street, a great writing center in Boston, and I started to work with a coach. So I put these names out there. I worked with Joy Baglio, and then later I worked with Jennifer De Leon, who many of you might know. She is I think an HGSC alum. She's a Connecticut College alum, which is where I attended undergrad. And ultimately, these two coaches helped me to uh, sort of reframe the book and take it out of rhyming verse and into more of a narrative. They were also really instrumental in teaching me the business of writing a book. So, one thing they taught me was how to write a query letter, which is kind of like a cover letter. And so I sent out many, many query letters to particular publishers, and they showed me how to go on Publishers Marketplace to pay to get a membership, um, to look up publishers who published books that I liked and respected, and to figure out how my story could fit in with what they were doing. So ultimately, my manuscript was accepted by Tilbury House Publishers, which is based in Thomaston, Maine. And just wanted to read you just a bit of their mission. Tilbury House publishes diverse children's books with messages of social justice, mindfulness, the redeeming power of imagination, the lessons of history, the rewards of scientific literacy, and the need to understand and steward the natural world. Um, and they offered me many, many edits and revisions, and I ended up rewriting the book many times. Ultimately, through my discussions with them, we decided that we needed the illustrator to be somebody who had immigrated to the United States. And so let me just go over to my illustrator, Luciana Navarro Powell, who is Brazilian American, lives in Seattle. And there's a little bit of her work down there. So she is the illustrator. We ultimately went through a lot of sketches and feedback. And so this is kind of how it works. Just wanted to show you guys. So she sends me black and white sketches of illustrations, and then I give feedback. And it gets really, really specific. Like the publisher didn't like how much the foreheads of the characters stood out. And, there were different things I asked, could that look a little bit more three-dimensional? So there's just been so many rounds of feedback. And the latest thing that I received is the cover concept here. So listen, wonder, ask. And that's another rough sketch, which will be revised again. So I wanted to just read you all the beginning of the book. At the playground with the squeaky swings, Nadine saw a new little girl. She had hair like black marker strokes and eyes that smiled. Nadine listened as she spoke to her dolls with words that were like shapes and angles tumbling across the sandbox. She wondered, then asked, "Are you new to the neighborhood?" And this is the first page of the story. And ultimately, the curiosity of Nadine inspires other people in the community to express curiosity in their neighbors and learn about a neighbor from Somalia, a neighbor from Russia, a neighbor from Bangladesh. And it ultimately circles back to Nadine, where someone is curious about her. And so I just wanted to show a neighborhood where people could connect with each other and express their curiosity in new languages that they hear. One other just resource I wanted to share is that I joined the New England Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. They had a conference which I attended, and that was really informative as to the industry and the business. And that's kind of the next phase that I'm entering, where I want to start taking my story to, independent bookstores, maybe doing readings and signings and having events. And so I think that if you're thinking about doing something like that, I really recommend this conference. And yeah, finally, just wanted to say it's coming September 2024, and I'd love for you to connect. There's my email at Eleanor Susan if you're on Instagram, Ellie Burke, Facebook, and LinkedIn. The publisher is Cherry Lake Publishing Group, who ultimately took over Tilbury House. So that was a change that happened. But thank you so much for listening, and I'd love to answer your questions now or at the end of our event.
Thank you so much, Ellie. So excited for the book to come out.
Me too.
Fantastic. And I also meant to mention that Ellie is one of our HGSE Alumni Council members as well. So really, really delighted to have you here, Ellie. And thank you for sharing a preview of your upcoming book. And so now I'm delighted to introduce Tyler Sassaman. Ty, do you want to get started?
Great, I would love to. Thank you, Ellie. First, I will say, and Lisa for introducing it. It's very interesting because my profession is as a upper elementary reading specialist. So I wasn't aware from the book titles that this would be books that I would be interested in professionally. It's hard to tell. So this is great. I will be looking up these books already. So my book came out a few years ago, and I think that I'll talk about the story. There's two interactive parts to it. There's a story that I wrote, and then there's a part that you can participate in as a listener. My process was different than the previous two, and I think it highlights a way that a lot of people are thinking about publishing right now. Might be interesting. I look forward to questions that people have for wending your way through the publishing choice making. So my book is called, oh shoot, I've got the blur on here. If you could, the book is called Just One Question. I'm a little, let's see, how can I get it so that it,
I think you have to cover your face, Tyler, in
Oh,
order
really?
for us to see it. No,
Oh.
with the book.
You know what? Okay. I'm gonna
Yep.
remove spotlight. I apologize for this. Let's see if I can. Is there a quick, easy way to take off the blur?
Put the book in front of your face and it'll think it's your face. And then it might put it in and put
Okay.
it back where your face is, and closer to your face. And it might get in focus. Nope, it just won't do it. Sorry.
Yeah, shoot. Let's see. Let me see if I can go to video and just change this real quick. Unblur my background. Great. The book is called Just One Question. It's in 2006, I did a road trip around the US for 6 months, leaving from Cambridge and then driving back to Cambridge. I had just graduated from HGSE and I studied teacher leadership. My journey was to interview people with a single question. And that question is, if you could ask everyone you met just one question, what would you ask? That's my little red car that I drove everywhere in and interviewed people. So the story is a memoir of my time, having just graduated, and looking in a professional direction at teacher leadership in a way that was kind of focused more towards an administrative direction in education, which I wasn't feeling it. I was an elementary classroom teacher for a number of years, and excited by the interaction with students, and was not seeking to become more kind of professional as an educator. So I was kind of at a crossroads. I was in my mid-30s, and this was an opportunity for me to get out and explore the world, to do something that was going to maybe inform how other people are doing their life path. And it was all that. It's a really fun adventure. There's a lot to consider as I'm at this tumultuous time in my life in this memoir. The second part is the question project. If you could ask everyone you met just one question, what would you ask? So I've been continuing this project at justonequestion.org. You can submit if you come up with a question there. And the book is memoir, and then the last 20 or 30 pages is just a list of the question. There's questions that people submitted in these little interviews. Sometimes they were extended. They would turn into long conversations. Sometimes they're just really funny responses. And so there's a list of like 750 questions that you can check out and read at the end of the book. So that's the participatory part. I studied with Eleanor Duckworth at HGSE, and she is rooted in constructivist education. So you construct the meaning through your experience. And I found, yeah, I see Marina saying, I love her. Yeah, she's amazing. Her class is kind of unstructured. You do these critical explorations where you try and figure out how mirrors work or how the moon is moving in the sky, and some really complex engagement in a very authentic and direct way. I think that I tried to make this whole book a critical exploration. I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't start with an intended outcome. And so you'll have to see what happens at the end. What are the learnings that I came away with? So that's the book itself. It's available on Amazon. Again, justonequestion.org is the question website. But I chose to self-publish my book. And I think it's really important that people, a lot of people are making this choice between following the publishing route or self-publishing. And I think it's really important to know what your choices are leaning towards, what kind of consequences of making that choice. So I'm going to take a second and talk about that. There were some things that I knew when I chose to self-publish. I wanted full creative control. I took the picture, I designed the font, I designed the cover, I laid out the whole book. I wanted to know that every word was my own word, that it looked exactly like I wanted it to look. And that was really paramount in creating this book. So it wasn't a big question for me in terms of pursuing traditional publishing. What I didn't know in that process was how the disparity in legitimacy between self-published books and traditional publishing. So I've gone on to, at this time I had no writing training. I did this process by myself. I worked with editors that I found. And through the MFA, I then went on to get an MFA in writing and creative nonfiction. This book does not show up on my resume as a legitimate published document. So in the world of traditional publishing, in the MFA world, people are writing and printing things all the time. I think it's just important for people to know that it's a pretty harsh line. When I did book readings, I did book tours, it was a full DIY experience. I loved that aspect of it. This book is testament to my own desire to kind of live that way. But I did find that it's much harder to get your book in front of people that the traditional publishing may offer, that self-publishing does not. Somebody asked about the seal. It won the gold medal at the Independent Publisher Book Awards, which is a great honor. I went to New York, and that was has never happened before to me in any artistic capacity. So that was awesome. I wanted to highlight that that choice making. Go into it knowing I have other friends that are talking about self-publishing and think that they have kind of what it takes to get their book off the ground. They may. If you have a lot of followers on social media or that sort of thing, you might have a strong body of people that are looking to buy your book. But just be aware. In terms of the process, I think I've got about a minute left. I wasn't a writer before I started. And it took a long time. I don't know about Ellie and Dr. Santiago, how long your manuscripts took. This from road trip to published copy took almost 10 years. And that is revising, that's working with editors. It was like a part-time job. I took a lot on myself, but know that your process is gonna be longer than you may want. I clinked glasses of champagne with some friends 2 years before the book even came out. So it's longer than you think. A couple quick other pieces of advice. Have more than one project. This is what I wanted to put out in the world. But if you're thinking about a career in writing, this should be one of multiple projects that you're working on. This may or may not take off. The next one may or may not take off. You're developing a whole brand of your writing. So have more than one project. This was a labor of love. It's been a lot of fun. And that's just one question. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ty. Appreciate that. And now on to our final author, Marina. You can get started.
Great. Thanks so much, Lisa. Sorry, everyone. I'm recovering from the flu right now, so my voice is going to be a little Or so this isn't actually how I sound. So let me just share a little bit about myself, give you a little context. I am an immigrant here in the US, like many of us. I came here when I was about 4 or so. And ever since then, I became a cultural broker for my family of Korean background, uh, and and ended up teaching and tutoring many kids that were coming in at the time in the 80s, who were also new immigrants and some who were international students and families, because I was the one that spoke English and Korean well enough at that time. I ended up going through pretty much all my primary school and high school and into college and onwards, going in and out of school, supporting families, supporting schools. I was a consultant for schools for example, and just random things like the deans, the disciplinary deans, where they were trying to figure out the cultural nuances of why certain students would behave a certain way when it wasn't within culturally it was appropriate from like a Korean cultural standpoint, for example, or maybe in the US it wasn't so much as culturally appropriate. So there was a lot of those nuances that I was translating for many families and schools for pretty much my entire life. Um, and also had started educational organizations based on that. Um, at one point in 2021, I believe it was, Wiley Publishing approached me and asked if I wanted to write a book on cultural competency, along with some other themes that they had in mind on empathy and global citizenship development, other areas that I was focused on at the time. I decided on, because it was so close and so near and dear to my heart, that the cultural competency piece would be great. You know, how can we help families and students and schools be um, more effective in understanding the various cultures that could influence one's thoughts, behaviors in classrooms, and performance. And there's so many books out there right now on how teachers can support multicultural classrooms, but not so much on how parents or guardians, the families can work with the schools on these cultural um, nuances that could affect a student's performance, you know, so it could be, for example, from the fasting of Ramadan or the Korean New Year's days, and you know, the list can go on, right? Where um, each of us carry certain cultures, and we've all had situations where we had to double explain or um, almost reteach the negative perceptions because of the negative perceptions that were out there. We had to either rectify, um, clear some stereotypes, or just fill in lack of information. So that's what this book does. I'll just quickly share my screen. So it is, you'll see it's found on Amazon and on Barnes and Noble right now. This is just the one on Amazon I pulled up. Um, so you can find this book here, and like my process in going through this was in 2021 they approached me in working with a publisher that is internationally based. They wanted me to first focus on the US population. So this book is actually very highly US centric, although it could be, there are chapters of it that can be used um, in different countries because of the fact that it focuses on various populations of cultures and tendencies or sort of cultural behaviors that are common to certain nations without stereotyping that. I'm very clear in this book. You know, anytime you get into a conversation about culture, you have to be really careful because there, you know, I'm Korean American, and I have to say, other Korean Americans that I met also come from diverse cultural backgrounds, and there's some commonality for sure, but each of us also has different ways of looking at that. So we had to be really careful that we weren't stereotyping ourselves, you know, in this book too. So as I moved forward, I was also, you know, we're going through the pandemic, right? I was also pregnant at the time. So it was kind of a crazy period of trying to write a book. And anyone who has written a book or tried to can try to imagine trying to write a book, research, do all these interviews as you are a much older parent. So writing through pregnancy at that age was certainly a challenge, but we made it through. Seth, I invited Seth because of the fact that he had such vast experiences in global and cultural education. He had taught in Thailand and Korea and many other countries in South America, was a part of in Ethiopia and many others. So I brought him in, who's also a colleague at Harvard Grad School of Ed. And my year, in full disclosure, he's also now my husband. So that also happened. um, Shortly after, a few years after graduating from HGSE in '07. So that process was where we did a lot of research, a lot of interviews with parents, students, teachers, administrators, anyone we could think of that would have had some kind of conversation with cultural backgrounds, which is pretty much everyone out there, right? So we just had to make sure that we were being really intentional in what we were trying to get from different people that we interviewed without leading them into a particular response. It was an incredible process, very short because they gave us not a long timeline. You know, I think Tyler, I know you were saying 10 years. For us, it was 2021 approached us. I gave them, they wanted us to be done in like next July. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't think so, because that's when most likely I'll be giving birth. So probably that was not going to happen. So we negotiated some things back and forth. And then finally, we settled on late 2022, around November, December, and then it was published in 2023 last year in March. So it was about a little less than 2 years of a process, and very intense process at that period as well. I want to be careful of the time because I think I only have a couple more minutes left, and I want to make sure that we leave room for questions to just stop sharing for now. Yeah, so um, I thought Lisa might be a good idea if I left a little bit more space for questions, because there are four of us here, and I'm sure many of the people here would love to jump right in to ask questions.
Yeah, that's great, Marina. I appreciate that. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to spotlight all of our authors for you folks. And this is a great time to ask your questions, whether you have a question for a specific author or one that's for all four of our authors here. Thank you all so much. This is really wonderful. You can raise your hand and unmute, and we'll call on you, or you can put your questions into the chat.
Oh, thank you so much, Julie.
I'm curious about, there is a question in the chat that I added my +1 to, but I'm curious, I'll just read it. She said, what is something you wish you'd done differently in the writing or publishing process, or a risk that you took that you feel paid off?
Mm.
I have a quick response. Well, I don't know if it's a quick response, but I didn't get to share, as someone had asked how I found a publisher, and this is related to this question. I sent my manuscript directly to an editor at Lee and Low, who, just through lots of good synergy, we talked and they decided to purchase work with me on the book. And through that process, I didn't have an agent. I worked directly with the publisher, and that was a great experience. And I really loved working with them and that particular editor. But I am sort of wishing that I did go through a more, I guess, traditional process of getting an agent, because now, as I'm working on other projects, not having an agent has been a challenge to connect with other publishers, or get my work out in the world a little bit more, broadly. So that would be one sort of lesson learned or thing I wish I had done differently.
I think for me, I wish I had started the process earlier, um, because I wasn't trying to procrastinate. There was just a lot of personal things going on, you know? But I had to squeeze in so much stuff in such a short period of time. And it wasn't even just because of that year and a half. It was just because I had to take my time and just kind of processing the book. And just the way I work is I'm someone who likes to kind of think it through in my head for a while until, it's almost like solving a puzzle, right? You kind of like flip it through in different angles and you try to see multiple perspectives. And that took some time. So it's not that I was so much not doing the work. I just wasn't doing the work tangibly. It was just all in my head. But and then at some point in 2022 in the summer, that was when I really got down to it. But it took me several months to get there. I wish I had started. I know I was thinking a lot, but I wish I had started that writing process a lot earlier, sort of concomitantly with the thinking process.
Yeah, I think I'll jump in just quickly that I was pretty clear about my choice, self-publishing versus traditional publishing, and that's what I wanted to do. I wasn't aware of how stark of a choice that was going to be, and so um, just putting it out there that, as you're thinking about your project, where do you want, what do you want to put out into the world, and how will this serve you in different ways in the future? Um, but Marina, I think that's really funny. Was not as busy as you, but when I was writing, I was classroom teaching full time. And I was, kids are at recess, I'm writing, my knees are together and I was the most productive then. It's really funny that there's a saying in schools, find the busiest person, they're going to help you out. I don't know why that is, but we often are very productive when we have a lot on our plates.
That's right.
I was going to jump in for Elizabeth's question, which is how do you get past a block and just put pen to paper? And for me, Elizabeth, I do this over and over again in life where I set a goal to just do something poorly, and I just say I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna write a bad story. And this it really came from taking Karen Brennan's class at the ed school and learning about tinkering and making mistakes. And I've taken the tinkering mindset into a lot of things that I do. I'm also a professional actor and I've written plays and I do a lot of auditioning. And so I just always get going by saying, I'm going to just do it badly. And how would I write a bad story? And then I'm able to allow myself to just do something.
That's a really nice approach, Ellie. I'll answer Horace's question on how much research data I did and was my work based on research, paper, etc. I did do a lot of research, a lot of interviews as well. And research is interesting because when I was doing research, there's also a lot of research on culture that's outdated, right? There's from the 1980s to today, there's been significant strides in the culture competency realm, and at the same time, still not, right? Like there's so much there, and then, oh my, really? We still don't know that, right? So that is one challenge that I had is when I was going through so much of the research. And then also thinking about who my audience was for, or who the audience is, because the audience wasn't going to be for other scholars. So I couldn't make it into a scholarly book. This audience is for families and school teachers, right? And so like practical things. So this book is a very practical approach to having these conversations. There are exercises, there's worksheets. I mean, there's like, you could copy things, pull it out. So because of that interactive piece, we had to be really careful and being too meta, with this research. So yes, we did do a lot of research. just to make sure that we weren't missing anything. And then at the same time, we were looking at practical things. Like Brown University has an incredible section on family communication with schools. And there are many other universities and other schools and other teachers that do that. So we pulled all these resources together, and that's that plus the interviews, and then of course my however old I am plus experience in writing this, is what became the book. I hope that answered your question, Horace.
Great. So I'm gonna read Lucia's question in the chat, and then I'm gonna get to Catherine, who has her hand raised. So Lucia asked, how has the writing process enhanced your understanding of your project?
I'll jump in with my own. We have all 4 very different writing projects, so I think you can take away what resonates with you for your project. Mine ended up being a rumination with my relationship with my father. What I take away from this writing process was I spent a couple hundred hours thinking about my relationship with my father and its dysfunction, and then how its function, and there was a lot of deep understanding that came away from that. So no matter what happens with this book, that's what happened. That's the interaction that I was engaged with while writing that story that's out to the public. So that's my own reflection on that.
Yeah, I would say that for me, it wasn't necessarily the content of the project, but the writing process for me. Like working with an editor was so helpful in having someone really hone in on what you're good at and where you need to work. Just helped me be a better writer. And so I appreciate that process for that. Now that I'm working on other projects, it's coming a little bit more easily. My sentences are better, things like that. So I appreciated that back and forth.
I think for me, it was understanding the complexity of culture even more than that I already had in my life. When you're dealing with I don't know if you've ever worked with, let's say, Korean students or some other students who comes from a cultural background where it's rude to stare at or make eye contact with a teacher, for example. All of these things that that some teachers are not aware of, and especially in the 1980s. I mean, at that time, people were still calling me Chinese, right? Or like, oh, where's Korea? Like, oh, you're from China? Oh, no, it's Korea. Like, what is that? It's not even aware. It's like, what, right? So it's just a very different sense of culture at the time. So, for me, kind of tracing back the cultural growth that we had as a country, but still trying to understand that there are so many cultural gaps left in this country. And what those gaps were, that type of analysis of trying to figure that out in a way that could be helpful to teachers and families out there helped me better understand um, my project in the sense of um, how can I be more attuned to other cultures out there, and because you're like, oh, you're the cultural competency person, right? Like you want to go into certain schools, but I don't think that exists. I don't think that really exists because it is so dynamic. Culture changes and it's so individual. So that is what helped me really, this process helped me better understand that.
Can I call on Catherine Tinko? Just see your hand up.
Thank you. Thank you for coming and sharing all these great tips, and congratulations to you all for your publishing. I really resonated with this group a lot, especially coming from different backgrounds and ethnicities. I really appreciate the representation of this group. I myself am an immigrant to the US, come from Latino background, and I've never seen myself as an author until more recently. So I feel that this process is very complex, especially for those of us that don't come from these types of communities that, you know, are aware of this process. So what would you tell, like, or how would you break down this process for someone who, you know, wants to tell a story, wants to support their community through literature, but is not really sure about just the process in general of publishing?
Yeah, I can speak to that just because I really felt like I started from ground zero as well. And I think doing as much networking as you can, talking to people who have done it. If you can, if you're able to pay for classes, coaching, or, you know, even a Zoom writers group, I would recommend joining like that society was for children's book writers, but kind of finding a community that way, and really being open to just to learning, to not just saying, now I'm gonna make a book, but like now I'm engaging on a journey to learn how you make a book.
And I would share as another Latina that your voice is your voice. Don't ever change it. Don't ever try to conform to anything in the publishing world because they may not understand it anyway. So I never changed my voice. I always spoke authentically about my experience and unapologetically about the things that I wanted to write about. And then after I had written the stories in my head, I would talk to publishers. So, you know, I didn't have that head noise because it sometimes can be challenging to write the story you want to write while thinking about, you know, how you're going to get it out in the world.
Yeah, I think just to piggyback on that is to first claim yourself as an author. The only legitimacy that you need is your own, and it's sometimes the hardest to give yourself that stamp that you're a writer. You're already writing the life that you live, and so what you are putting on paper is just an aspect of that. Have a project that you really love, something that's, I mean, mine is very project driven. It was, I you know, my book is based on that, but you should really enjoy what you like writing about. Are you continuing to be curious about it? Do you want to learn more? Is it helping somebody that you love? You know, whatever your project looks like, it's got to have that its own motion to it, that you want to keep doing it. But ultimately, you give yourself that legitimacy, and that's the whole thing. You'll find out all the other aspects just by going for it, giving yourself that stamp of approval.
Yeah, I third that motion. You know, Liz, I especially liked when you said, you know, unapologetically, or, you know, you were just using your voice, right? And that's one thing that I remember when I was at HGSE, Jerry Murphy, for those who remember Professor Jerry Murphy, he taught teaching leading management organizations. And one of the things he talked about was how to be your authentic leader. And I didn't really know what that meant at the time, you know, because you have all these ideas of what leadership is. I carried those messages to me of what authenticity is in my writing. And I thought about that class all the time. You know, so this requires you, it's a wonderful journey, a process for you to be thinking about, who am I as a voice? You know, what is my voice? And then going forward with that in that unapologetic way, fiercely, but of course, giving yourself room to grow and being okay with, I think, Ellie, you had said, right? Like kind of forgiving yourself, right? Of thinking back and say, you know what, I was that then. Oof, man, okay. But I'm now this, and that's okay. It is the way that I would look at it.
Well, I think that that's a perfect place to end. Liz, Ellie, Ty, Marina, thank you so much. This is really fantastic. Really appreciate all of your time. I think it was truly inspirational. You could see in the chat all the connections and excitement that folks were expressing. And I know that we're a minute over. I just want to reiterate that we will be sending out an email next week that has contact information, the recording, and other resources. So in case you didn't have a chance to get your questions answered today, you will still have that opportunity. And thank you all so much for being here. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks
Thank
for
you,
coordinating
Lisa.
this. Thank you,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you so
Have a good
much.
day.
Bye-bye.